obviously equity in housing looks many different ways. And these are some of the points of what that would look like. So obviously we want to be able to have affordable housing for those who are low income. We want to have a variety of housing because we know that one shoe doesn't fit all. So we want to be able to make sure that there's different varieties of housing that meets those needs. Obviously, there's a lot of demand and need for housing, but not enough supply. So we really need to address that and also preserve the current housing to make sure that it's livable for many years to come. Screening criteria, we're talking a little bit, Melinda talking about people who may have been part of the criminal system or maybe dealing with certain issues that have maybe you know uh, deter them from getting into housing, whether it's a criminal background or debt or past eviction history. So looking at that, so we're not screening people out, but screening people in. Accessible housing, obviously people who have disabilities, we need to address that and make sure that's available for them. And policies and programs to support communities of color. Another thing that, Melinda was talking about, how do we, support communities of color specifically within housing structurally to make sure that we're giving folks opportunities for housing. So that's the big picture around housing equity.
Thank you, BNF, for grounding us. So the Housing Beaverton project specifically, it has two major parts to it, which are both really important to make sure we're serving both current and future residents. And this is also required by state law. So the first phase of the project, the housing needs analysis, is how we determine current and future housing needs. And we do this by looking at demographics, future population growth, how much housing and land we have now, and figuring out if it's going to be enough in 20 years. The second phase of the project, the housing production strategy, which is where we are now. This is where the community and city council determine what steps and actions the city will take to make sure we provide that needed housing. So keep in mind that the city doesn't actually build housing. The strategies really focus on removing barriers to housing development and encouraging or promoting housing production by the private and nonprofit sectors. And community engagement is also a crucial part of this work to make sure we are understanding our community's needs and getting input on the housing strategies. And BNF is going to go into a little bit more detail on that.
Great. Yeah, so like I mentioned, the guiding light is equity. And so we want to be able to create a framework to guide that work. So what does that look like within this project? So of course, we want to understand disparities. So breaking down that by, some of our data by race, ethnicity, and understanding the variety of populations, specifically marginalized populations, and understanding what they're experiencing. And then obviously acknowledging past racist practices that may have contributed to some of the disparities that marginalized communities have experienced, and understanding that as well. And then we want to be able to consider populations' needs that are vulnerable, like people with disabilities, young people, seniors, veterans, historically excluded groups. And then we also want to be able to consider and understand culturally responsive housing needs that we know that is a big thing that we have to address, and around preferences and housing needs like multi-generational housing. So this is basically what is kind of guiding us into how we kind of go about this project. Yes, so I will be talking about community engagement. Community engagement is a big piece of this project. as you all know, City of Beaverton the last couple of years have been doing a lot of projects that kind of touch around housing. And so we were able to look at some of that past engagement and see what we heard and who we talked to. And then obviously with this engagement with this project, we who were the missing people and the missing links that we needed to kind of look more into. So with the past engagement, obviously we heard affordability. That's like a huge thing. Access to transit, jobs, stores, medical care, just being really accessible to an area. And like I mentioned earlier, housing variety is like something that people really want because not every housing situation is going to match your need. So making sure that that's available to all people. Access to green space is a huge one. And obviously we heard a lot of similar things with this engagement in this project, but obviously some things kind of stuck out for us because we did talk to folks that may have not been engaged in past engagement as much, like people with disabilities or young people. So obviously for some of that, the needs that we heard are supportive people and services like wraparound services, knowing that people need more support, maybe people who are younger in transitional situations, maybe unaccompanied, maybe people who dealing with drug and addiction, who need more of that support. So that's something to consider. Storage space, safety and security, ground floor, low income ADA units is something that we heard a lot. So I think those were the major things that we heard that were really imperative. And then also just kind of piggybacking on people with disabilities, we heard, that people with disabilities are not a monolith, like their needs look different. And so kind of understanding that from the perspective of housing availability and also understanding that reasonable accommodations can be a burdensome process. Like we've learned that. And these are some of the things that we really felt like were important to kind of mention. So that's a little bit about that. And I'll talk a little bit later about what this next engagement, we're going to have a phase 2 engagement. So I'll talk a little bit about that later. Great. Next slide.
Great. Thanks, Bianeth. So based on what we've learned so far from the housing needs analysis, this is just a few of the things we've learned, which is in 20 years, by the year 2042, we expect to have 19,000 more people in Beaverton. And if we assume an average household of about 2 or 3 people, that means we need about 9,900 more homes. Many of these will come from Cooper Mountain and South Cooper Mountain, which is being developed right now. But we also need to make sure there's enough housing within the rest of the city as well. We also know in talking to people from past engagement that we have some housing disparities that we need to address. And, for example, low-income households currently experience severe shortages in rental and ownership housing. Of course, you all know this. Since 2010, the average cost of rent has nearly doubled. And there is currently a need for more ownership housing at lower price points. Most households in Beaverton cannot afford the homes that have recently sold in the city. The median sale price of homes that sold in Beaverton within the last year was $518,000, which is not affordable. The greatest unmet need is for households making less than $35,000 per year, and neighborhoods that are most vulnerable to gentrification and displacement largely correspond with areas with greater numbers of people of color and households with lower incomes. This tends to be in more central Beaverton and in the southeastern part of the city. We also estimate that in 2042, about 21% of new households will be very low income, which is making between $27,000 and $45,000 per year. 14% of the population is estimated to be extremely low income, which is making less than 27,000 per year. And so we need to come up with housing strategies to better serve these populations. Beaverton is also becoming more racially diverse. The fastest growing communities of color are people who identify as Asian, Hispanic or Latina, and as having 2 or more races. Large and multi-generational households are more common in communities of color compared to white households, and large households may also need bigger homes or specific housing types that can serve a greater number of people. So this is something else we need to be thinking about. And households of color are also less likely to own the homes they live in compared to white households. Latina and Native American homeownership rates are the lowest of all racial and ethnic groups. Black homeownership is also low. And we also know, like, this isn't really new news. We all know a lot of this. This is an urgent need right now. But this is something that we're really focusing on for the housing production strategy so that we can explore ways to address these issues. As BNF mentioned, individuals with a disability are another underserved group. An estimated 12% of the population, or around like 11,300 people, currently report having some sort of disability. And so, 20 years from now, that's going to be an even larger share of the population. And especially considering our aging population, about a third of our seniors identify as having some sort of disability. And we don't have data right now on how many accessible units exist in the city. We know from just talking to people that there's a huge shortage. So, and as BNF mentioned, housing needs also vary depending on disability. But we know we need to include some strategies to produce more housing that is accessible to people. We do have, given all of that, we do have some existing city projects and programs to help reduce housing disparities and make sure people can access the housing they need. These are just some examples. For example, we have fair housing education for landlords and tenants. Thanks to the Housing Options Project, which Rob led, we now allow more housing types such as duplexes, triplexes, townhouses, cottage clusters in our neighborhoods. The Cooper Mountain Community Plan, which is being planned for in the southwestern part of the city, will allow 5,000 new homes, which will include a mix of different housing types, including regulated affordable housing. We have also acquired land for housing in the past. One example is the Marianne, which was completed in 2021, which includes 54 units with 2 or more bedrooms for low-income families, and that's in downtown Beaverton. We also offer down payment assistance through Proud Ground in the Portland Housing Center. We offer home repair services and accessibility modifications for low-income homeowners. We have rental assistance through Community Action. And we also partner with nonprofits to serve people experiencing homelessness. Another thing you might have heard, which the city has recently bought a property off of Beaverton Hillsdale Highway to open a year-round shelter. So that's something else that the city is working on. All right, and BNF is going to talk a little bit more about what we're thinking about for future housing strategies.
Yeah, so we are thinking about some ideas of what, understanding the need, what can we do as the city. Obviously, a lot of these things can be done, obviously locally, but we know that sometimes the city can only do so much, knowing that state or federal um, policies or programs could have more of an impact or have more of an authority of impact. But some ideas are, preserving existing low cost housing, like manufactured homes, aka mobile homes, knowing that that's something that needs to be preserved and also be made to make sure that it still stays low cost. Obviously, we've heard in the cohort and in our engagement that people want home ownership opportunities, and they want to be able to own their own home and pass on that generational wealth. So increasing opportunities, obviously within the city, making more affordable rental housing. That's a big thing right now. Supply is important, and making it easier for developers to build, and also incentivizing and requiring more accessible housing, and making housing obviously accessible with transit parks and services, and bigger homes or more homes for larger families that are for multi-generational living, and allow different types of transitional housing. So those are some of the strategies. Obviously, it's not an entire list, but it's something that we would like to continue pursuing. And we're hoping to do engagement, obviously continued engagement to um, learn from the community and also learn from developers and builders who could support and understand what we need to do to make this happen. So that's some strategies that we're working on. And now to the next.
Great. So now we're going to do a little activity. So I'm going to paste this link, or yeah, I'll paste this link in the chat. And if you could all go to the link in a web browser, that will take you to this Jamboard activity. And if you're on your phone or something and it's difficult, you can always participate in the chat as well. But it will open up. One moment while I share my screen again. If you click on the link, it will look something like this, and there are a couple pages here. The first page is in Spanish. If you go to the right, the first page is in English, the second page is in Spanish. So if you could add a sticky note and pick either yellow or green, and just let us share your thoughts on what do you think we should focus on for housing strategies, or what's most important to you. Is it home ownership? Is it preserving existing low-cost housing like manufactured home parks, or maybe other types of affordable housing? Is it building more affordable rental housing? Is it more housing that is accessible to people with disabilities, or homes for multi-generational living or big families? Having transitional housing options like micro shelters or sleeping pods, or maybe it's having more housing focused near transit and parks and other services. So we'll just take a few minutes. I see people are adding their stuff, so that's great. Also, would anyone like to share, when you're done, of course, share why they kind of listed something as high priority or important, and maybe in some other areas why you put lower or medium priority?
There's a lot more green than yellow.
There is a lot more green. Mooney has their hand up.
I know that like nobody else but me put micro shelters and pods as a priority, but basically living in tents and being swept every week is not sustainable for people to be able to get out of the status of being unhoused. And I've worked with people who are in the tiny home / pods community on Southwest NATO Parkway. And they are a lot more successful because they have an address that they can use for jobs and for getting into permanent housing. And their health outcomes are better because they're not constantly getting sick. They have electricity is available to keep warm. They're not constantly getting swept so that they're not losing what few possessions they have. And there are services available to them in that small community. It's about 30 tiny homes / sleeping pods. And I find that that model is so much more sustainable than just people being randomly in tents and being swept every other week and losing everything they have and having to find tents and sleeping bags and blankets all over again. So that's why I put it for high priority.
Thank you for that. Did Maria Dolores have a hand up, or did someone else?
Yes, me arrepentí, pero bueno, yo traté de poner, y no sé qué fue lo que pasó, pero yo lo consideré de alta prioridad el preservar los bajos costos y también la renta, las casas existentes. A ver, en la 2 no sé qué pasó, pero un segundito. A ver. Ay, no sé qué le moví. Es que tuve que salir un poquito de la computadora, pero ya estoy aquí otra vez. Ok. A ver si aquí lo logro. Caray. Ok, acá estoy. ¿Se borró en español? Bueno, yo había puesto de muy alta importancia en la número 1, en la casilla número 1. Igual, pues ser dueño de mi propia casa también, de muy alta importancia. La accesibilidad es muy importante también para mí, porque después de COVID yo contraje artritis reumatoide, entonces se pueden imaginar mi visualización a 20 años. Esperemos que todo esté bien con mi salud, pero no quiero imaginar que si tengo que comprar un condominio o una casa de doble piso y de repente no me esté funcionando bien mi mi salud física y no pueda yo desplazarme en mi vivienda. Es complicado y siempre he sido partidaria de las casas de un solo nivel y con un poco de espacio en la parte trasera para pequeñas reuniones con la familia, ya que para mí es lo más importante, la familia. Gracias.
Thank you, Maria. Would anyone else like to share?
I just want to mention, Jenna, that I'm going to put one-story home for accessibility under what's other considerations for housing needs. So I'm going to add that on there.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, if you go to 3 and 4, there's kind of another question, because obviously we know that we didn't include all of the housing strategies that we could have included. And so this is really an opportunity to share more of your ideas or something that you'd like to see that you just haven't seen in some of the housing ideas that we shared so far. It could be a specific housing idea that you know of, or maybe it's just, I feel like if you feel like a certain community's needs need to be met and they haven't been met. So we'll just take a few minutes. Great, so I see BNF put 1-story homes for accessibility. Someone put repurpose buildings that are not being used, which I love that idea. It's a great idea. Tenants unions, multi-generational or / community housing. Someone also put, can the city work with big companies like Nike or Intel on housing issues? Not sure that works, but if they some of reasons why housing is getting more expensive.
That was actually, you know, a consideration. We're working with consultants on this project, and that's one of the suggestions that they actually said. So yeah, I think you're kind of on point with that and addressing who we're going to engage with housing production. So thank you for that reiteration.
Great. Loans, empty housing / building tax. Work with banks and loans. What are the barriers? Building trust with our communities. Does anyone want to expand on what they wrote?
Yeah, I'd like to hear about empty housing.
Yeah, I was curious about the empty housing building tax. Yes. Mooney?
Some locations have taxes levied on unused buildings and unused housing to prevent like investors using unused housing, unused buildings for tax breaks, which people are doing here. Where they keep rental properties or office properties like unrented, basically, and use them as tax write-offs. And there's so much unused housing and unused office space in the area that's just being held open. And that could be used for actually housing human beings. And to prevent people from doing that, you levy a tax on it. And other locations around the country have started doing this.
Do you have any names of cities or?
I know several locations in California have done it.
Yeah.
Several on the East Coast have done it. And it has reduced the vacancy. I can't remember offhand. I am on drugs right now. I just am on cold meds, flu meds, and antivirals. So my brain cannot brain today have the dumps. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Thanks, Mooney. We'll look it up and we'll do
Yeah.
our own little research, so no worries.
Yeah.
Great. Other ideas that people had? More education on the type of programs available, hold landlords accountable, some type of registration that tracks landlords who are often taking advantage of people.
I'm assuming like if landlords have a history of certain, maybe like eviction. Yeah, I don't know if that exists. Maybe Mooney knows.
Sorry. I have like during the eviction moratoria, my the management company that runs my place started a 3 strikes eviction to get around the moratoria, and then started doing bogus lease violations so that they could just evict people at will. And I was victimized by that and had to get like a cease and desist letter from Oregon Law Center to stop them from evicting me, because they took like basically one thing and broke it down into 3 separate lease violations and then said, we can evict you now. And also landlords will do this sort of thing to evict people basically for no cause, but making up a cause so that they can raise rents that are above what the Oregon law says, because they can only raise it like 9% or whatever it is. And they want to raise it like, say, $300, $400 or $500 or more. And the only way they can do that is by getting rid of the existing tenant. And landlords have a lot of ways to get around evicting people around, the no cause eviction. Landlords are very tricky. They have shady lawyers who help them do crap. And so finding a way to crack down on that with those loopholes would be very, very nice.
Yeah, that's awful. But thank you for sharing that. All right, we won't spend too much time on this, but I do want to note some other things that people have said. Support/promote community education on housing rights and homeownership. More education on the type of programs available. I believe this says have programs for people with ITIN numbers. Rent price regulations, I think I caught most of it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, so we can wrap this up. But we just have a few more slides. BNS is going to talk about next steps. Thank you all for sharing. That was really great to get all your feedback on the housing strategies we've started thinking about so far. So really appreciate you all.
Yeah, so I'm going
Okay.
to share about next steps. I know we're kind of carrying into Councillor Hassan's presentation, so I'm going to be really quick with it. So obviously we're going to do public engagement around housing strategies. Obviously, the cohort has been amazing in being engaged in this, but hopefully engaging with some folks on that. And then, we are having our housing talks with City Council, which is basically a series that has been educating City Council on different parts of housing. We know that housing is a huge entity, so we want to be able to educate City Council on housing to make decisions around funding and policy and prioritization, which will be in February and in March, those discussions, and we'll share a bit more later on. But maybe with the workshop coming up with Councillor Hassan, that you'll get some practice if you want to attend those or share your story or do public comment or email write in. And then we are going to do, we're going to complete the housing needs analysis and housing production strategies based on community and decision maker feedback. We are going to be working with developers, property managers, funders, stakeholders that support housing production. And we're going to learn more about, what are the needs, what are the barriers, and kind of wrap that up. And then seek council approval in the summer, fall. So those are our next steps. And if you want to be engaged or learn more, we do have a website, beavertonoregon.gov/HBP. You can learn more about what we're doing there. Lots of great resources about the project, community events, community engagement. And then if you want to connect with Jenna, her contact information is there. If you have any thoughts or questions that we couldn't get to today, please reach out. So thank you so much for taking the time to let us chat with you about this project.
Oh,